Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University.
Hi, welcome to our Wednesday edition of the Politics Guys. It's Jay here, and we've got something sort of special on tap today. My interview with Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. And this is special to me because I actually worked with Jim years ago when he was a freshman legislator in the Ohio House of Representatives, and I was a staff member. And really, he was really an impressive figure then and impressive now. And whether you agree with him now, and I didn't agree with him all the time then, and I don't necessarily agree with all the time now, he has always been a man of integrity and someone who I think is worth listening to. And we thought that it would be great to have him on our show. But Mike, first, we're going to talk about how we've gotten here where we have the Freedom Caucus in the House, which Mr. Jordan is a co-founder of, and its impact and its kind of place historically. This is sort of a different moment that we've had. There've been sort of I guess you'd call them what would you call them, like not insurrections, but always sort of factions of a party.
Sure.
Perhaps that might split off into their own party.
Yeah, well,
historically, but rarely. Go ahead.
I've said, yeah, and certainly this is a case of that because the Freedom Caucus, being a relatively new thing, it formed in just a few years ago in 2015, and they were an offshoot of the Republican Study Committee, which right now the Republican Study Committee, the Republican Study Committee was founded in the early 70s, and they basically were designed to be kind of a place where the more kind of socially conservative Republicans in Congress could sort of have their own forum, and so that was kind of carved out. And then the Freedom Caucus is sort of a rump group, if you will, of that. And I think right now there are like 31 members of that. And so they felt like the Republican Study Committee was not sufficiently advancing what they probably call the freedom agenda, what I would call the seriously libertarian, uber conservative agenda. But that's the kind of thing you get. And I think certainly it's a creature of its times, as we've seen politics become so much more polarized, particularly in the House. And so I think it's just kind of a natural outgrowth of of the partisan polarization we've seen.
Well, and I think it's also maybe an outgrowth of the sense that a lot of Republicans have had where they elect someone who runs on a Republican platform, who then gets to Washington, and it at that point becomes what's known in the lingo as a rhino, a Republican in name only. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we can talk about, and we'll do this. We have a post interview discussion between you and I about some of those issues. But I think it is important that this is a little bit of a different moment in that the issues that the Freedom Caucus pushes are largely fiscal, although many of its members are also social conservatives. But it's a closer outgrowth, I think, to the Tea Party movement that brought in a lot of fiscal conservatives to Washington in the mid-2000s. But before we get to that, I think we should hear from our first sponsor and then on with the interview.
By now, you know that Dollar Shave Club ships amazing razors for a few bucks. I mean, the name's sort of a giveaway, right? And Jay and I have both used Dollar Shave Club for a while, and you've heard us say all sorts of good stuff about it. Now, what you might not know, and I didn't even know it until recently, is that Dollar Shave Club now also has products for all sorts of other personal grooming needs. I mean, body wash, shampoo, hair gel, even lip balm. And really, that's pretty great because you'll get the same high quality as their razors, great pricing, and the convenience of not having to go out to the store, which, I don't know about you, but when I do, I feel just assaulted by a gazillion choices and way too much marketing talk. And seriously, last month I had to find a new shampoo and I left the store feeling emotionally drained, which, okay, maybe means I could use more sleep or something, but I mean, my God, I didn't even know where to start. Anyway, if you're like me and you're sick of the nonsense at the store, now's the time to try out Dollar Shave Club. For a limited time, DSC is basically giving away their starter set to new members. For only $5, this starter set features their executive razor and 3 trial-size versions of their most popular products that help you stay fresh and clean. In your first box, you'll get their shave butter, body wash, and One Wipe Charlie's butt wipes. You'll also receive their executive razor, which includes their premium weighty handle and the full cassette of cartridges. And after the first box, replacement cartridges are sent for only a few bucks a month. Now, this offer is exclusively available at dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. Dollar Shave Club's high-quality products will have you covered from face cheeks to butt cheeks. There's no better time to try the club.
First of all, I would like to welcome to the show today a very special guest, Congressman Jim Jordan of the 4th District of Ohio. That's sort of a north-central Ohio. Congressman Jordan was born in Ohio, in Champaign, I believe.
Yep. Actually born in Troy, but spent my whole life in Champaign County. Most of my life
grew up
in Champaign County.
Yep. Attended the University of Wisconsin, where you earned your bachelor's in economics, followed by a master's degree in education from The Ohio State University, and a law degree from Capital University, which is just outside of Columbus. And I want to let our listeners know also, I very much had the privilege of working with Representative Jordan way back when you were a state representative from that district.
And when you were keeping Mr. Batchelder in line, right?
Yes.
Bill Batts, great American.
So, I guess my first question, and in our show, what we try to do is get voices out there. We're not so much there to make an argument, but to have a conversation. And we had some folks who had brought up that a lot of the interviews we did were from folks on the left. So we like to get the perspective from someone on the right.
No one's ever accused me of being on the left, so that
no one has. So I guess my first question to you is, as the co-founder of the Freedom Caucus, if you could give our listeners sort of your unvarnished, unfiltered version of what the Freedom Caucus is, why it was started, and why you think it's necessary.
No, we got a simple and basic mission statement. We think there are countless number of Americans, countless number of families across this great country who feel like Washington has forgotten them. Our job is to remember them and fight for them. We try to do it in a strategically and tactically smart way, in a productive way, but we're gonna push. Even sometimes that means pushing our own leadership to do what we told the voters we were going to do when they gave us the privilege to come here and serve in the United States Congress. And it's really that basic. And we have 30-some members who focus on that every single day we're here.
Okay. I guess my next question is, how do you respond to it? Again, you get criticism, obviously you get criticism from the left, but from sort of the mainstream center right, even. Yeah, exactly. It's not easy. And I guess, I'd ask you how do you as a Freedom Caucus member respond to those claims that, oh, well, look, you're blocking stuff up, and come on, let's just give a little together.
Well, first of all, I'd use the example. I don't think we're blocking anything. I think we're making legislation better. We're the group who put the health care bill over the top in the House. 32 of our 34 members voted for it after we made it better. The initial version that was introduced was not what we told the American people we were going to do. So we went to work making it better. And when it passed, it was closer. Still wasn't what we told them. We told them we're going to repeal it and then replace it. We should have done 2 pieces of legislation like we advocated at the Freedom Caucus clear back in the start of this Congress. But we said, if they're not going to do that, they're going to try to take elements of repeal, elements of replace, put them together. We're going to make that bill as good as we can, a bill that actually will begin to bring down premiums. And that's what we did. It passed the House. Unfortunately, it failed in the Senate. But in a general sense, look, the mainstream press is never going to like what we do. We just know that. I tell my colleagues, if the press isn't saying something bad about you, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. So just accept that as the fact that they may not like what we do. I don't base my actions and what I spend our time focused on here in Congress on what the Washington Post and the New York Times has to say about me. Because if I did that, I wouldn't be doing what the folks back in the 4th District of Ohio and Americans across this great country of ours sent us here to accomplish. So I just tend to focus on what did we tell the voters we're going to do, and let's do that. And that's what the Freedom Caucus is all about.
One thing I hate about buying tickets to live events is the feeling that there's a better deal out there somewhere that I just haven't found. But I'm not going to spend a ton of time looking at a bunch of ticket sites either. I mean, I don't have the time or really the patience for that. And that's why I love SeatGeek. They've solved both of these problems for me. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. It only takes 2 taps on the SeatGeek app to buy tickets, and it's also quick and easy if you go through their website, SeatGeek.com. Now, the reason SeatGeek can give you such great deals is that they compare multiple ticket sites to find you the best deals. And then they even grade every available ticket based on value so that you can instantly see the best deals for your budget. And best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app or go to SeatGeek.com and enter promo code PoliticsGuy today. That's promo code PoliticsGuy for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
Well, and following up from that, obviously one of the big priorities of the Freedom Caucus and of conservatives in general is reining in federal spending. And last week we saw a situation where the Trump administration entered into a deal where the debt limit was extended for 3 months without significant cutbacks in spending. And I know you've spoken on some of the Sunday shows last week about what your vision would be as to how to use that debt ceiling to bring federal spending back in line to what it's been historically.
Yeah, do what we've done every other time. Almost every time you increase the borrowing authority of this country, you do something to address the underlying problem. That didn't happen last week, and that's why I said it was not a good deal for the American taxpayer. The plan we think makes sense is to cap spending as a percentage of GDP. Remember, Jay, today, the debt just went to 20 trillion. So we're now at 20 trillion. That's a lot of money. $61,000 every man, woman, and child would have to pay back in order to pay off that $20 trillion burden we now have placed on our generation and younger generations of Americans. So what we say is let's get spending back relative to the size of our gross domestic product back to its more historic norm in modern times. And that's something below 20%. Right now we're at 20.6%. It went as high as 24% of GDP in the early part of the Obama administration. So let's take it back down to where it's supposed to be. So cap all federal spending, overall federal spending as a percentage of your economy as you move forward. If you do that, I'm willing to vote to raise the debt ceiling, but I'm not willing to just vote to raise the debt. I use the example Sunday. It's like you got a kid in college. Your son's in college. He's spending more than he takes in. He's already piled up a lot of debt, and he just wants to be able to, for the next 3 months, just raise the limit on the credit card, borrow as much as he can, and not have to worry about it. But that's in essence what the deal is. That's not a smart plan. So let's focus on the underlying problem when we actually increase the borrowing authority.
Not to put you too much on the spot, but what do you think your chances of getting that reduction are? I mean, do you feel you're in a better position now or worse position now to try to get those reductions?
Well, understand that we didn't give the president any good options. I mean, I said this yesterday. I said this morning. We took the longest non-election year break in over a decade during the August recess. And the Freedom Caucus said, clear back in July, don't go home until we address what we're going to do on Obamacare, what we're going to do on our tax reform plan, and certainly don't go home until we have a plan on the debt ceiling. We all knew this debt ceiling increase was coming. The Treasury Secretary had said for months that September 30th was when this was going to come due. So we should have stayed here and put together a plan. So the options presented to Mr. Trump were a 3-month increase in the debt ceiling without addressing the underlying problem, or a longer period of time increasing the debt ceiling without addressing the underlying problem. Neither are good choices because none of them address the problem, the $20 trillion debt. So that's why we got to put together a plan. I think we can. I always tell folks, you're an American, so you got to be optimistic. So I'm optimistic. I think we can make this work. We can come together as a conference, Republicans in the Congress, and put forward a plan that says cap spending relative to the size of your GDP as you move forward. And if we do that, let's increase the debt ceiling, not do anything to hurt the markets. So let's get that done, but let's address the problem.
Okay. Another, again, related, the other side of the coin from spending, obviously, is taxes. And that's something that's been talked about, and we're going to see some tax reform legislation at some point. What would be your vision, or the Freedom Caucus's vision, just as an outline for what we ought to see in tax reform?
Lower rates, simpler, flatter, fairer. So look, on the personal side, Let's go to 3-4 brackets. Let's lower taxes for middle class families. Let them keep more of their money so they can chase their goals and their dreams down. On the corporate side, we got the highest corporate rate in the world. Let's go to 15%, like the president has said. I think our vision is where the White House is, where President Trump is. The low corporate rate of 15%. The one concern we have is this talk here in Washington of revenue neutral approach to tax reform and tax cuts. Understand, Jay, revenue neutral is a Washington way of saying the tax burden stays the same. We just shift around who pays what. And in that scenario, what always happens is the connected class with all their big-time lobbyists, they get a good deal, and middle-class families get the shaft. So forget this revenue neutral idea. Again, when did Republicans adopt the premise that letting you keep more of your money is somehow a cost to the government? I just never adopted that premise. I think it's a faulty premise. It's your money. So let's just design a tax code that lets families keep more money and one that is conducive to producing growth in GDP, economic growth over the long haul. You do that, you're going to get the growth you need to begin to deal with a $20 trillion debt.
Would your thoughts, and again, not to put you on the spot for a plan that hasn't been drafted yet, but suggestions of if we cut back certain tax loopholes, certain deductions, traded that for lower rates? Does that go into the idea of simplification that you mentioned?
I'm fine with that, but I don't think you have to do it in a revenue neutral concept where some genius at the CBO, which I don't always put a whole lot of stock in what the CBO says anyway. But
there have to be so many cuts for so many tax cuts. Yeah.
But I'm for simplifying it, of course. We do want to be able to do your personal taxes on the personal side of the ledger. You do want to be able to do that on a postcard. Keep a few basic deductions, dependents of pro-family deductions, personal and dependent deductions. Keep the mortgage interest, keep charitable, and then make it, here you go, fill it out, few brackets, and make it as simple as possible. I'm all for that. But don't get locked into this revenue neutral world that so many in Washington want to focus on.
That it has to be sort of a 1-for-1, or at least a 1-for-1 as they say.
We don't want that.
Yeah. One more topic and this is an issue that you've been really out in front on over the past 4 or 5 years, is government accountability and bureaucratic accountability. And I'm thinking specifically of the IRS and the lowest learner situation. Recently, Jeff Sessions indicated that he did not intend to prosecute, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what happens next, and what will you continue to do? What can Congress do to?
No, you're right. I thought that was unfortunate. We'll have a chance to talk to the Justice Department about why they made that decision, but I think in the more general sense, Jay, and this is important. There's a couple things that really make voters mad. One is when politicians say one thing at election time, get in office and do something else. Like we saw on Obamacare with 6 United States senators, Republican United States senators, 18 months ago voting to repeal Obamacare. They had that same piece of legislation in front of them, and they voted the other way. That drives voters crazy. But the other thing that drives them crazy, and appropriately so, is this idea that there's a double standard, that there's 2 standards. There's one standard of justice for you and me, but if your name is Clinton, Comey, Lynch, Lerner, there's a different standard. So we have called for a special counsel to look into Clinton, Comey, Lynch, Clinton Foundation, Fusion GPS, all this stuff that went on. If we're gonna have a special counsel to look into potential impact of that Russia may have had on our election, then I say let's get all the truth out there for the American people.
And just so our listeners know, Fusion GPS is the group that hired the person, the British to do the dossier that sort of launched so much of the Russian.
Let's get all the facts out there. So think about this. I know you're a sharp legal mind. So in the summer of 2016, why in the summer of 2016 would the Attorney General tell the FBI director to call the Clinton investigation a matter, not an investigation? Why would she do that? I mean, last time I checked, James Comey wasn't the director of the Federal Bureau of Matters. So why would she do that? Why would the Attorney General in the summer of 2016, one day before the Benghazi report was going to come out, 3 days before Secretary Clinton was scheduled to be interviewed by the FBI, why would the Attorney General meet with former President Bill Clinton on the tarmac at the Phoenix airport? Why would she do that? And why?
Well, she said to talk about grandchildren.
Right. And so you probably saw the story just a couple of weeks ago, Jay. Why would in the days after that meeting on the tarmac, when Attorney General Lynch is communicating with the public relations people at the Justice Department via email, why in her emails would she use the name Elizabeth Carlisle and not use her real name? I mean, if you're just like you said, if you're just talking about golf and grandkids, why do you have to use a fake name? And why would Cheryl Mills get the greatest immunity deal in history as Secretary Clinton's chief of staff? And why, as we found out just last week, was James Comey drafting an exoneration letter about Secretary Clinton before the investigation was even completed and before she was even interviewed? Now, why would all those things happen again in the summer of 2016? What could be going on in the summer of 2016 that was so important that these kind of things would go on in our Justice Department? Seems to me they were probably trying to influence the presidential election. So if we're going to have a special counsel look at possible Russian influence in the election, I think we got to look at what looks very clear to me as Obama administration Justice Department trying to influence the 2016 presidential election. So this bugs America. I hear it every single day across our district, this idea that there's a standard that exists for us regular folks, but a different one for the connected class. And that is, it's supposed to be equal treatment under the law. And we think we should get the answers to these important questions.
Yeah, and I would just add, this is something I bring up on our show a lot, is that as a conservative, and whether someone is a conservative or liberal, these are issues that go to sort of civil liberty issues and the reach of the government into your ability to elect people, your ability to speak, and so forth, and ought to be something that is receives some broad support, not just from conservatives, but across
the board. I mean, this is when you're talking about basic equal treatment under the law, basic civil liberties, right? I mean, we talk about Lerner, we're talking about your First Amendment right to free speech. And the IRS, an agency with the power and the clout and the influence on people's lives that the IRS has, was systematically and for a sustained period of time trying to limit your political free speech rights. That is just fundamentally wrong. And so all these things are important, and I hear about it all the time from our constituents.
So, well, I know you are an incredibly busy person, so I'm going to let you go. But if there's anything else you wanted to add or just say to our listeners, we're happy to do it, and we're happy to have you on the show again anytime.
I appreciate the opportunity, appreciate the good work you're doing, and thanks for having me on today. But I do got to run, so take care, Jay.
Great, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
So, Jay, I thought it was great, a really refreshing change, not just, probably for our listeners too, who are probably sick of me interviewing everyone. I thought it was great that you got to interview someone that you really, I think it's fair to say you admire Jim Jordan. Yeah. I mean,
I do. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, there were a couple things that stood out to me, I guess. One thing is that the whole idea of freedom in the Freedom Caucus, to me, based on what I know about the Freedom Caucus and what I heard in the interview, is freedom seems to be all about freedom from government. And hey, that's fine, but that's only one formulation of freedom, obviously. I mean, I think certainly you can make a case that sometimes government is too intrusive, but I'm also for things like freedom from, rapacious, unregulated credit rating agencies, or poor and sick people having the freedom to go to a doctor and not have to say, well, should I go to the doctor or should I get food for my kids? That sort of thing. And, that's part of a larger argument, obviously. But the point being is that, and of course, it's a branding issue, right? I mean, they're for a specific understanding, a libertarian understanding of freedom, allowing people to do what they want with their lives. And it's, and that's one understanding of freedom. FDR back in, the day had a very different liberal understanding of freedom. And I'm not making a case for which one is better. I think there's a place for both of them, but it's clearly very focused on shrinking government, basically. Would you say that's
correct?
Fair?
And I think something that Congressman Jordan pointed out is the goals of the Freedom Caucus. And again, I think if you look back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, there was great care put into creating that freedom from government. That was a really a concern at the founding. The idea that, and it's often, stated as, look, the government that can give you everything can also take everything away. Without getting into our underlying ideological disagreements, I think what a lot of what I got from Congressman Jordan was that what the Freedom Caucus wants is for Republicans to keep the promises that they campaigned on. And so often you have Republican candidates who campaign on that smaller government, less taxes, less intrusive agenda. But then when they actually get to Washington, are happy to compromise, and maybe compromise isn't the right word. Some might say capitulate. But just the concern that a lot of Republicans have had. This happened during the George W. Bush administration. That look, even when you've got a so-called conservative in the White House and you've got conservatives majorities in Congress, in many cases, spending continues to rise. New entitlements are created, and there really isn't ever that pushback, that pullback to rein in spending. And I think that's one of the goals and one of the guiding principles of the Freedom Caucus is that, look, if we're going to campaign on these issues, then we're going to govern that way too.
Yeah, and I think that was obviously something that he started out with, that idea about the debt ceiling. I thought it was an interesting suggestion he made, that he would be in favor of capping spending as a percent of GDP. I believe he said it was 20%. That stuck in my mind because I think that was actually something that Mitt Romney might have campaigned on back when he was running for president. And that would, I mean, if you take a look at over time at, spending as a percent of GDP, I mean, we tend to, in recent history, really since the 1980s, we've been slightly over 20%. For a while there in the 2000s, we dipped a little bit under, but right now I think we're at just over or right around 20% of GDP. So what it seemed to me, I guess what I was struck by was that what he's saying isn't nearly as radical as I would have expected from a Freedom Caucus person. So that it seemed almost more reasonable. I think it's a bad idea, but it seemed like a more reasonable bad idea than I expected from him. So there was that. What did you think about that?
Yeah, exactly. And again, what we're talking about is, that so I think he said was about 22% of GDP is where we are now, and that's even with the big bump that occurred in 2008. But again, contrast that to any time there's discussion of any kind of cuts, sort of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that you hear of people are going to be thrown into the streets and so forth if we have even these marginal cuts, or sometimes it's even just a matter of cuts in growth, because again, you could still even have growth in spending as long as you have a commensurate growth in GDP that keeps that ratio in place.
And one thing that I
the other thing
I said, one thing I liked about that is that I think it's a lot smarter to tie these things to something like GDP, as opposed to what I've heard from some other conservatives before about this idea of a balanced budget amendment, which I think it gives you a lot less flexibility and just is a really bad idea for a lot of reasons. But this, like I said, seems, fairly reasonable. I just pulled up data from the Federal Reserve, and they said in 2016, which is the last year we have data on, federal spending was 20.68% of GDP. So that's not a lot. And obviously GDP is pretty large. And so even a part of a percent is a significant change, but still, this isn't some kind of crazy, insane sort of proposal, and I give him credit for that.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear from a man of your standing. The other issue that I thought was interesting that we talked about is when achieving this, and particularly in the context of an upcoming tax plan, is how do you score these things? We've talked before about deficit reduction, and the Simpson-Bowles Commission had the recommendation, and this is years ago, that look, here are what our tax expenditures essentially, and here's what our revenue enhancements. And the idea would be, if you want a budget, you've got to do a one-for-one cut. And I think there's always been some disagreement in terms of, are we talking about a static scoring type situation versus dynamic scoring, with the idea being when you cut taxes, yes, you may have a dip in revenue initially, but you make that up more so by increases in spending and in commercial activity. This is the so-called Laffer curve of the 1980s. I know you wouldn't like that, but I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. And I thought that was and I just be interested in your take on what about that, if we were to restructure something where it's not a one-for-one reduction, for every dollar of taxes that are reduced, we have to make that up somewhere else.
I think there are a couple of related issues here. For one, I at least in part agree that it certainly is possible that by implementing what what Jim Jordan and other folks would call pro-growth, lower tax policies, that you actually make up for at least part of what you lose in enhanced growth. And that's kind of what, to a ridiculous extreme, that whole Laffer curve, which has been, at least to its extent, has been discredited pretty roundly by economists. But the underlying point, there's something to it, is that you need to.
Well, I would say to the extent economists have discredited it, the 1980s and 1990s have credited it. But,
well, no, that's you're entirely wrong there. But the point being is that tax cuts do not pay for themselves. That's a ridiculous argument. But in any case, it's still true that tax cuts, while they don't pay for themselves, certain types of tax cuts will give you advantages so that you can't just say, well, we're losing X dollars in revenue, because if people are actually make more money, they pay more in taxes, even at a lower rate. So there's something to be said there. It's right. Just that
even the most hardcore Keynesian economist, I think, would agree that tax cuts have the again, assuming they're properly targeted and so forth, produce an economic boost.
Well, yeah, they might say that they would not necessarily agree that they produce the boost that offsets the revenue lost from the cut. In fact, they wouldn't say that. But I think the related issue is one term that I heard him say almost like a mantra was no revenue neutrality when he was talking about tax cuts. He's talking about that 15% corporate rate that President Trump wants that he's not going to get. But in any case, I think, to me, that's sort of a Trojan horse, because my sense, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my sense is sort of what Jim Jordan and the Freedom Caucus want is they're interested in, bottom line, shrinking government. And so revenue neutrality means that there's no shrinkage of government. It just kind of shifts things around and so forth.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
And so, yeah, and then he didn't actually say that, but I'm sure that's what he meant, is that we want government to be smaller, providing fewer services to fewer people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think this is, and again, to me, that's a welcome message, and to a lot of Republicans. I mean, there was a Governor George Voinovich of Ohio used to say that his goal was to do more with less, and often some conservatives would respond to that saying, no, the goal ought to be to do less. I mean, the idea that you want a government that does more is sort of antithetical to conservatism, and the idea being that, look, the more we get government out of the way, then the more the private sector and other non-government entities can grow, the more room they have to operate. So, I mean, I'm I think you got it. I'm happy that I think. Whether you agree with Congressman Jordan's message or not, I think he did a good job explaining it and putting it out there.
Yeah, and I think it points out that there's kind of that fundamental distinction. I talked about this earlier about what do we mean by freedom. That also gets into the role of government, and certainly I thought he seemed like a really nice guy and earnest and all that, and did not seem like he had horns or anything like that. And and he was I think he legitimately believes that we as a country will be better off if we are free from government, or not totally free, but freer from government. I'm sure he'd look at it as interference, whereas I think I and a lot of people on the left would say exactly the opposite, that no, we would be better off if government intervened more in certain areas to help out the neediest and the most vulnerable. So,
sure. Yeah, fair enough. But I just want to say again, it was really an honor talking to him. I'm really proud and happy that he came on our show. And we, of course, invite him to come back anytime. And hopefully we're going to have more of these types of interviews coming up with lawmakers in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we close, there is one other thing I wanted to say. I wanted to get your thoughts on. Toward the end of your interview with him, there were I thought there were kind of these odd arguments about the Obama administration trying to improperly influence the 2016 election. I mean, he kind of on the economic stuff. I was like, okay, I don't agree with them here on this really, because we have some fundamental ideological differences, but okay, this all kind of tracks for me if I accept certain basic assumptions, which I don't accept, right? But on this, he sounded kind of like a right-wing Michael Moore to me, and I think Michael Moore, he makes me roll my eyes with his, ridiculous kind of making these weird connections, tinfoil hat wearing kind of stuff. I think, conspiracy theory. And
Well,
I gotta say,
I don't think
Jim
it's a conspiracy
Jordan's
theory at all, and I'm happy to extrapolate on that. I mean, this is something that, again, a lot of your medium to center right editorial boards have talked about for years, and that is that, listen, if after, in the wake of Citizens United, Lois Lerner was or others at the IRS were keeping conservative groups on the sidelines during that election. They were unable to raise money, unable to spend money. That made a difference. And when the government is involved in again, in what appears by all, I would say most evidence to have been a targeting of conservative groups based on their political leanings, that's a problem. That is government interference. And I think there's and especially by the IRS, which is sort of a powerful, has the ability to do a lot of bad things to you, either monetarily or even criminally. And there have been proposals that maybe that authority ought to be better vested in the Federal Elections Commission, which is also run by a bipartisan commission rather than a administrator who is essentially a appointed civil servant. But that's where that argument's coming from, and I think it's a legitimate argument, and many on the right have made it that look, in the Romney election, a lot of these groups were hamstrung and could not participate.
I think I certainly read those arguments and I'm familiar with those arguments, and I think they are incredibly overstated and exaggerated. Now that's a whole different conversation, obviously, but I also wanted to get to your point on that you suggested maybe vesting that kind of authority in some kind of bipartisan board. That sounds exactly like the sort of thing that somebody who wants government to be as ineffective as possible would suggest, because the FEC, of course, is notoriously ineffective, because when you have a board that's composed of equal numbers of partisans from both sides, whenever there's anything that's even remotely controversial, what happens is, of course, is the three Republicans vote one way, the three Democrats vote the other way, and then there is no decision. And so that's a recipe for government inaction. And so, in specifics with the Lerner case, again, I think that's probably another discussion for us to get into. But I just think maybe even more broadly that it felt to me like he was pushing kind of a false equivalence argument, what I think is a false equivalence argument, that, this Trump stuff, it's similar to what the Democrats are doing. And to me, there's a huge difference between very questionable claims of advocating for your party's candidate, which is most of the stuff that he was talking about the Obama administration, and potentially working with a hostile foreign government to plant fake news stories. Those things, to me, that's not quite as much of a false equivalence as calling the Antifa and neo-Nazis the same thing, but it's also a false equivalence. And I think that the right far too often defaults to, Obama and Clinton did this, when we're talking about a pretty significant difference of degree.
Well, I mean, that remains to be seen. Let's wait and see what the Russian investigation unveils. But I think it ought to be of real concern to anyone, and I brought this up in the interview, when you have the elements of our government trying to enforce the will of the administration, and that's what's different, is you've got. And again, there was a lot written at the time. Did Lois Lerner do this on Obama's instructions, or more sinister, is she just thought this would be helpful? And that's what I think is troubling. Is Americans ought not to. I mean, I think we certainly ought to be on guard against foreign powers. We shouldn't have to be on guard against our own government.
Well, I agree with you in principle on all those points. Actually, I think where our disagreement is the extent to which this actually occurred in the Obama administration. I expect I have a pretty strong agreement with Jim Jordan on that as well.
Well, and again, darn it, if Lois Lerner's server hadn't been destroyed, erased, we might know. But darn it, for some reason that got erased. So it may be we'll never know. And as we mentioned, the Justice Department has indicated it's not pursuing charges, but Congress will continue to investigate, and we'll see what we find out.
That we will. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We hope you liked what you heard and that you'll check out today's sponsors. Dollar Shave Club. New members get Dollar Shave Club starter set featuring their executive razor, a full cassette of cartridges, shave butter, body wash, and One Wipe Charlie's butt wipes for only $5 by going to dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. And SeatGeek. Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app or go to SeatGeek.com and enter code PoliticsGuy today. That's promo code PoliticsGuy. Listener support, it's a huge help to us. We really appreciate it. And if you're interested in joining our great group of Politics Guys supporters, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, it would be great if you could share this episode with your friends and followers or pass along our new show posts and tweets that we put up on Facebook and Twitter. Also, leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes really does help. If you got a comment, question, correction, or just want to say some random thing to us, hey, you can email us at mail@politicsguys.com and our Facebook page where you can message us, and we post stuff throughout the week. It's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.